Okay, so we're bringing our next panel up on biotech in the world of healthcare. We have Steve Wiggins. Where are you, Steve? So Steve is a healthcare entrepreneur, investor, and mentor who's launched 9 businesses from scratch. One which grew to rank among the 300 largest U.S. companies during his time as chairman and CEO. Another became a leading company in the emerging field of healthcare bundled payments, managing over $7 billion in annual healthcare spending. So, Steve, you're here. Yeah. Basil Hantash is a serial. Basil Hantash is a serial entrepreneur, and he's been on the founding team of 10 medical devices and biotech startups, and has launched or acquired a dozen life science products from medical devices, diagnostics, small molecular drugs, and cell therapy, and nanotechnology. So I guess you really like healthcare, right? The serial entrepreneur. You weren't like just throwing that out there. That's like very real. And David Kim is the founder of Ghost Tree Capital, a hedge fund focused on healthcare innovation with a strong emphasis on biotechnology, and he leads there as the chief investment officer. So with that, gentlemen, everyone has a microphone, yes?
We do. Good.
Take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Well, hope you haven't fallen asleep yet, because if you haven't, we're going to talk biotechnology. This will really put you down. But we've got 2 incredible guys here, and regrettably, none of us have cool handles. We had Flex up here earlier. It was one of the great names. No first name, just Flex. Just let me add about a couple of about the 2 guys next to me here. First of all, David is one of the best golfers in Dorado. For those of you that don't know, he actually lives in Bahia and Dorado. And if you did have a handle, it would be Clutch. Just want to suggest that as maybe Flex Clutch. And David, just to add to the introduction, he went to medical school, went to Harvard, then to medical school. He went to Johns Hopkins. We have some other Johns Hopkins graduates in here. And then he went to Citadel, and then Diamondback, his start into the hedge fund business. And it was at, I guess, Diamondback where I saw Mike Chu here earlier. You guys were there together. So Mike's another guy who runs a big hedge fund in the healthcare space. He's here today too. Basil is just to round out, he's got about 100 something patents. Fame. He lives in Montehedra. He's got a family here. He moved and has a bunch of great companies that he's building. One happens to be creating THC and CBD out of a bacteria that grows in the ocean, Vibrio nitrogen. And that's how I met Basil as an investor project there. He's using bioreactors. One of the things we'll talk about here is synthetic biology, I guess would be in the category with that business. And he trained at, I guess you went to college in Illinois, as I recall, and you went to, you did your residency and your postdoc at Stanford, and then you got an MBA at Wharton. So these guys have lots of expertise, very different in this field. This field requires that kind of deep domain expertise. It's the 10,000 hour rule for sure. And these guys have it. So there's no fame without accomplishment. No, in this space. So no influencers do so well in biotechnology. So with that, let me maybe start with David, and kind of the question is just what the heck? Just are coming out of a tumultuous year across the board in equities. You manage a pretty big book of just biotechnology, and just for everybody's knowledge, full disclosure, I'm an investor in David's fund also, and they're up this year. Amazingly, the industry is probably down 30%, 40%, something like that. So maybe you could give us maybe take us back a little bit and bring us up to today. What's going on?
Happy to. First of all, anyone that's played golf with me knows what Steve said is completely false. In any case, look, we're in the throes of a painful and protracted bear market for biotech equities. I'm sure a lot of people are witnessing it, and certainly in other areas of the market, we've all experienced it. What's unique about biotech is this has been going on for a much longer period of time. The sector peaked last February in 2021. We're in our 21st month of an extended bear market. Just to give you some perspective, a good proxy for the mid-cap biotechnology sector is an ETF called the XBI. That ETF peaked in February of 2021 at around $175 per share. Today, that's trading at roughly 80, and actually troughed earlier this year in May at about $65 per share. So from peak to trough, we're looking at a decline of nearly 65%. Having said that, we enjoyed an extended bull market, nearly 10 years long in the biotechnology sector. And so I think it's helpful to look not just where we are today, and certainly we're going to spend some time talking about the future and innovation, but the last 10 years has really been an extraordinary period of growth and innovation in the space. I went to medical school back in the 1990s, and a lot of the technologies that we invest today were unheard of even back then. They were science experiments. A lot of it, back then would have appeared to be science fiction. But today we're talking about utilizing our own cells to fight disease, directly editing genes. And a lot of these novel technology platforms have emerged over the last decade and have really spawned an extraordinary era of new medicines. And so, if you look at what's happened over the last 10 years, we were kind of just plodding along. The sector was fairly range-bound post-financial crisis, and we really didn't kind of enter this extended bull market until 2012. And around that time, the first immuno-oncology therapeutic was approved in 2011. That's a drug called Yervoy, manufactured by Merck. And that's, when we say immuno-oncology, that's really leveraging our own immune system to fight cancer. And back then, it was certainly an interesting new medicine, but very quickly we saw the emergence of multiple other therapeutics that leverage the same type of technology. Both Merck and other companies like Bristol and Roche developed what's called PD-1 inhibitors. And in a very short period of time, we saw the emergence of a lot of new medicines that targeted very difficult to treat diseases in a more focused, targeted manner with, not just great efficacy, but also safer, more convenient profiles. And in tandem with all of that, not only did we see a lot of new medicines develop, but M&A picked up considerably, which validated a lot of these new medicines. And so you saw a number of companies being acquired by a lot of the larger players in the space for, upwards of 5, 10, even 20 plus $billion. Many of these companies were pre-commercial, meaning, they didn't even have revenues yet. They were still, R&D based companies, yet you saw the biggest players in the space acquire them for very, substantial amounts of money. And all of that kind of converged in a short period of time. And very quickly, going back to the XBI, we saw that trade, call it high teens, low 20s, for several years post-financial crisis. Beginning in 2012, that index started increasing by about 30 to 50% per year. At its peak last February, it reached about $175 per share. And, from 20 to 175, that was, nearly an 800% return. Now, where we are today, we're in this bear market, and it's been very difficult for biotech investors. And, I think the hope is that we're closer to the end, not the beginning. Basil will talk about a lot of these emerging technologies. I think will continue to drive innovation and hopefully value creation in the space. Why don't I pause there if you have any additional questions on that?
No, just to add emphasis, the space generally, globally, I think biotech's about $1 trillion of revenue, that's just public companies. And
even in Puerto Rico, it's probably the largest portion of the economy. I think it's roughly 30% of GDP. When I moved here, I don't think I realized Puerto Rico was a biotechnology hotbed. Since the 60s, pharmaceutical companies have been setting up manufacturing here. probably a dozen of the largest biopharma companies in the world have manufacturing here, exporting roughly $50 billion in manufactured product. Probably 10 out of the top 20 drugs in the world are manufactured right here in Puerto Rico.
So we're going to kind of bounce here back and forth between the industry and the science, because we've got these two extraordinary guys and we don't have much time to kind of pull out of them all that they could potentially offer. And so along those lines, obviously it's a huge industry. It's important to Puerto Rico, and a lot of the innovations are happening in sort of multiple domains, and it's confusing to most of us. So maybe, even though you're a guy with 100 patents, maybe you can bring it down to Steve Wiggins level and take us through maybe, and I know you put something together, and you'd put a page or two to help.
Yeah,
that
it
question.
just serves as a helpful guide so we can cover all the bases. The current trends involve, classes such as personalized and drug research, big data, artificial intelligence, and synthetic biology, which we heard about earlier with food security as well as energy. And biotech feeds into those sort of innovations. The most exciting, I think, Steve, are in personalized medicine and synthetic biology. And we could get into some of the details of why. But in general, there's this tension between these innovations, which are quite tech-driven and costly, and where drug pricing ends up for the finished product. As a percentage of GDP, the U.S. is at about 20% of GDP spent on healthcare. That's in direct costs. I believe the figure goes up to as high as 26% when you look at indirect costs in that as well. So the current technologies are leveraging not necessarily blockchain yet, although that's coming, machine learning and data analytic tools that can take massive data sets and extract information that otherwise is not gleanable for the average physician or researcher. And because of that capability, you could now make smart medicines. You could make medicines that are smart for the whole population, as well as ones that are in particular individualized for a person that would otherwise not be able to achieve a treatment without custom funding that out of pocket themselves. And that's unique because there are a bunch of what we call orphan indications that don't get investment because the market size for those particular conditions is now large enough that you could manage to develop the drug and still have economics that work for the company. As an example, I'll just forward to a relevant slide. The table shows you what a typical biotech company goes through. It's a very long process, on average about 12 years, costs $1 billion to $2 billion to bring one drug to market, and the risk of failure is above 90%. So the way to recover or recoup those costs over aggregate industry is that you end up having very costly medicines produced in the end. And the reason
people a sense, maybe David, you have a better sense of that. Price of a typical biotech drug, price of the highest one, which is
I mean, a lot of oncology therapeutics are $50,000 to $100,000+ per year. Some of the novel medicines like gene therapies, CAR Ts, can be north of $1.5–2+ million per year.
So there's a tension between investing to have better health outcomes and improve productivity, and who's going to bear the cost for this, because it's not currently obviously sustainable. And some of the new biotechs have this mandate where the personalities behind the founding teams care about democratization of healthcare. So they're looking at the cost of goods as part of their business model for two reasons. One, because of the mandate towards having ethical medicines that are accessible from a cost perspective, but also because it gives them a competitive advantage when they have numerous other competing companies pursuing similar endpoints. If their cost structure is much higher, they could just simply price down and squeeze those people out of the market. And that really is the right approach, I think, to keep the GDP issue down to something bearable, because the innovation is happening so rapidly that costs could spiral out of control. Back up. Well, on the personalized medicine side, go back to 1990 when the genome was starting to be sequenced. That took about 13 years or so, 2.7 billion. Now we're in a place where, personalized medicine, you get a genomic sequencing test, do at home for less than $300. And that gives you so much visibility about your health risk factors. So that the cost to obtain that information are relatively cheap. And it's not just cheap for an individual, it's cheap for companies to start gathering this data and start matching patients intelligently to clinical trials that they would benefit from, as well as to start develop more intelligence around clinical design for studies. Is the cost of $1 to $2 billion per drug to bring to market is largely due to the size of the studies that you have to put in place, sometimes over 1,000 patients per phase, as you get to phase 2 and 3. And doing the recruiting is quite slow, and finding patients that fit the criteria is difficult. So it becomes extremely costly, and then you've got all the infrastructure support that's needed to track all that data. But with the advent of machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's created systems that allow you to digitize this information and put it into an anonymized database, and then be able to probe that database such that you could match, profiles of what a good drug should look like with what disease or patient bases would match it. An example I think David mentioned was in something called CAR-T, which is the chimeric antigen receptor. Basically, you're building a smart missile against a cancer that is otherwise difficult to manage. So what happens is you take the patient's immune cells, you modify those, put them back into the patient, then the immune cells that are put back start to educate the native immune system in a way where it can start seeing a cancer that otherwise it couldn't see before. And therefore, you rely on the patient's own body to solve a problem without having to add all these toxic drugs that cause typical side effects you see during oncology. And that's just the beginning of where this medicine is today. Those treatments are already in the market and in later phase trials. So you're going to see a slew of those come out. But that's just one example of personalized medicine.
So maybe, David, you have to invest in all this. So it's tough. Having been on the investing side at Essex, for the 10 years I was there, we'd see the teams come in like you, and they would have designed a trial that was going after a particular clinical endpoint, and the trial was designed to win. We had the former head of the FDA on the team. We had somebody who was part of the start of the whole process that led to, it was the Aspen group, or that led to what became Venter's whole initiative, figure out the human genome. How do you, as you look at these, and some of these are designed, these trials are designed, they have advantages because they're selecting the patients, they're selecting the endpoint, they're very much targeting so that they can get an approval that they can then apply it to more and more people. It's tough to pick the winners because in all these that we invested in, even the ones that worked, when we got to the end zone, where we originally in the deal review, we thought, well, we're going to be there, we're going to dominate this market for this particular condition. And when we got there, there were 4 others just crossing goal line at the same time. How do you think about parsing through? 'Cause new novel therapies. How do you think about it?
And the failure rate for drug development, exceeding 90%, and even drugs that advance through the various phases. There's preclinical, then early stage clinical, first human trials. There's multiple stages. Why so many of these therapeutics still fail in their pivotal studies. So, for us as investors, we try to distill the universe, which is extraordinarily large and complex, and identify key areas of unmet medical need, and then identify compelling novel technologies that are potentially capable of addressing them. And it's really at that intersection where we see the opportunity for a lot of alpha generation. I guess the one benefit of being a hedge fund, we are able to bet short, so go against a lot of these therapeutics that are destined to fail. And so in our strategy, at least, we run a fairly balanced portfolio of both longs and shorts, and hopefully can capitalize on even failed new drugs. Having said that, I think we look for, not just clearly defined mechanisms, but also really understanding the underlying biology. And there are a lot of horrible diseases out there which are actually very poorly understood today. So Alzheimer's, which of course all of us can relate to. We probably have family members that may have suffered from it. The biology driving Alzheimer's continues to be poorly defined, and it's probably multifactorial. And despite probably hundreds of billions of dollars that have gone into drug development for Alzheimer's, even today, that disease is, horribly underserved. And despite the first disease-modifying therapy being approved by the FDA last year, aducanumab, the efficacy of that drug is very underwhelming. And so, those are the types of disease areas that we aren't as active in, as opposed to other areas like oncology, where, you can clearly understand the biology. There might be a specific driver mutation that can be targeted by either a small molecule or a biologic that targets it in a very focused manner, whether it's a CAR T therapy or an ADC technology, which is utilizing both antibodies and various chemotherapy payloads to go after things almost like a smart bomb. Those are the types of diseases where we feel like we can identify potential winners and losers and make fairly educated bets. Despite all of that, despite, doing a lot of hardcore research and data analytics, our hit rate, is nowhere near, 100%. It's probably, no better than 55, 60%. And, so therefore risk management and kind of appropriate sizing is critically important for us.
But are you buying and holding? Are you looking for events? Are you waiting for a clinical trial to reveal? Are you waiting for,
investing.
What are the signals that are the ones that drive you, and how long are you sitting in?
Yes, so, drug development is very milestone driven. And so all of those various milestones can serve as discrete catalysts from an investing and trading standpoint. So if you look at most biotechnology stocks, it's rare that they look like a straight line going up. At every stage of development, there's an opportunity to be right or wrong, both for the actual drug and development as well as for investors looking in from the outside. And so, we try to isolate these kind of idiosyncratic, uncorrelated events. So we're very catalyst oriented in our strategy. We know kind of what stage of development various therapeutics are. We'll make sure we get in front of kind of those events, do the appropriate research to identify our level of conviction in those, and we'll then therefore take a variety of bets based on discrete catalysts. And once again, given the high risk, high reward nature of drug development, a lot of these things fail. If based on our research we believe the likely outcome is negative, we are happy to take a short position. And so when you look at the overall portfolio, it's fairly diversified. There are a number of long and short positions. Despite what might be going on in the broader world from a macro standpoint or even the overall sector, these individual events typically decouple from the broader market, so you can capture uncorrelated alpha opportunities.
So, Basil, if you can bring us back now to some of the science, and one of the things you mentioned was personalized medicine. Obviously, that's driven by our ability now, gene editing, gene writing. We just had Moderna, had great examples of that just the result of COVID. Maybe for the audience, help us understand what the heck is gene editing and what the heck is gene writing, and where is that right now in the evolution of the science? Are we expecting to see more?
There'll be a substantial boom in that area. I'm going to try and see if I could find. Here it is.
Scientists always have slides, by the way.
So in terms of timing, right now, all of that is pretty much preclinical. There are some public companies, and mainly they're private companies, and they're employing a first-generation technology called CRISPR, came out of work at Harvard and Berkeley. And that technology is really geared to edit genes, but in microbes or bacteria. And bacteria are trying to fend off viruses which attack them and then cause problems in their life cycle. Since then, there have been, progressions in the field in the gene writing tools that allow you to function within human cells, not necessarily geared towards bacteria. And these technologies will allow you to take a single base pair mutation. So if there's one error in the DNA code causing a disease, you could go in and deliver a series of mRNA treatments that get into the body, pass through the liver, and then start modifying the liver cells such that they could repair the disease. An example would be sickle cell, which causes major problems in blood oxidation, or PKU, phenylketonuria, something that every child is supposed to be screened for. And there are thousands of these diseases that currently have no therapeutic options at all. So if you look at the little pictorial, the gene writing tool, basically, there's an enzyme or something that catalyzes a reaction, and then there's a template, and that template finds a place in the DNA where there's a problem. It could be single base pair or larger, and the template then brings the enzyme to that area and allows it to make a cut, open up the gene, and start writing code that corrects that problem and remove the error zone. That's an incredible feat to be doing in a lab, but this is going to be done inside the body. There's currently a company that is doing this ex vivo, so in a closed loop system bedside, but the new technologies are going to be doing this through an IV that introduces the technologies, and those technologies have a short half-life. So they, over time, a short period of time, they self-dissolve. They're digested by the body. So there's a huge safety benefit that comes with using this approach, and it allows you access to thousands of diseases that currently cause massive loss of productivity in the country.
Does the body figure it out, or do you have to keep getting?
No, so there's a multiple dose period, and that's all being worked out in these preclinical studies that are expected to go into the clinic within, I'd say, 2 to 3 year time frame. But what happens is the first dose gives you somewhere between 20 to 60% success in correcting the problem. And each disease has a different threshold of how much correction is needed to end up addressing the particular problem. If it's a metabolic disorder, for example, like PKU, can't process phenylalanine, and builds up and causes, toxicity. So if the liver has about 20% correction, then you have a twofold higher level than is needed to have full function and not see any, repercussions from the mutation. But they can get up to as high as 80 to 90% correction rates. So it allows you to deal with a number of different diseases, whether they are low in threshold or high in threshold, and get full correction.
So, David, in the investing world, these are obviously very expensive. Henry Tremere, as I recall, when he was building Genzyme, he was such a hero. But the reality was he shamed health plans into paying because he found orphan indications. Orphan indications, just so everybody knows, very small populations that have certain diseases. It doesn't make sense for these drug companies to develop these drugs because there just aren't enough patients to spread the cost out. Obviously, we saw these are very expensive. Henry Tremere comes, Henri Tremere comes along and creates public events. There's a lot of press. Go back in time, you'll see he was stirring the pot, and health plans who were having to make the math work on suddenly $1 million drug or something like that had to pay. So that originally his argument was not going to matter. You're only going to see one of these patients every 10 years or whatever, or this might be the only patient be in the history of your health plan. Well, now there's 600, 700 orphan drugs, something like that. Fastest growing part of the cost equation in healthcare by far. What do we do? To me, the black swan that comes along, access down, is that Medicare is going broke. I don't want to scare anybody, but the Medicare Trust Fund is going to be technically insolvent at the end of 2026, and so something has to change. They have to change drug coverage. They have to go after the big ticket items. First, they'll raise the age at which you get Medicare, but eventually they'll have to get to some of these. So what do we do what happens in the investing universe if we no longer allow $50,000 a month, $100,000 a month drugs, which are beginning to have a huge implication on not only insurance companies, but now with most of the country, most of the U.S., most of Puerto Rico, employers self-fund. They're getting hit directly with those costs. Maybe you could both just address, what does it mean on the investing side, and how do you discount that? What are you thinking about when you invest? Are you just believing, as we did a due diligence last week on a company in Cambridge that has a gene writing technology, also graciously got on the call, and they're going to charge $300,000 a year. So what do we do in that situation? What do you do as an investor in Basil? What can be done? How do we get the costs down? Maybe David, it's a broad-ranging issue, but it's a black swan eventually for the space. If we come back and we say, we're going to cap at $100,000, then you're on your own. System can't afford it.
Yeah, as an investor, I don't know. I hope I'm retired by then. No, in all seriousness, yeah, look, the rising cost of healthcare is a huge issue, economically, socially, etc. Ironically, as an investor, typically our firm is looking for those drugs that have pricing power, that can charge hundreds of thousands of dollars, etc. So obviously in the short term, in terms of value creation for these various enterprises, it's a positive. Payers do pay. Steve ran Oxford Health back in the day and probably had those conversations.
We paid.
Yeah, and he had to pay. But long term, I think, it's going to be important to kind of see the convergence of a lot of these technologies that Basil mentioned to drive faster, cheaper, more effective and safe therapies And, I think today, one of the, perhaps discouraging things is a lot of these high cost drugs actually aren't very effective, and sometimes they're not even that safe. Oncology drugs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a year might only extend survival by a few months. We talked about some of these Alzheimer therapeutics already. They're not bringing back memory. They're only slowing the rate of decline. In fact, most drugs that have been developed over the last 5 to 10 years aren't cures. Often they're only delivering symptomatic improvement or reducing the rate of decline. So I think, as we move forward, truly value-added therapeutics that, transform the health and well-being of individuals, those that will continue to be paid for, even if they cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. And those that don't, I think very well will be vulnerable to lack of payment and access. And that's, probably for the better, perhaps.
Let me follow up on that. So the deep, dark secret in the world of healthcare is that America pays for the world's medical research. We reimburse. If you get approved by the FDA, if you get an NDA, which is new drug application approval, it's a license to print money, like you say. And it's a 95% gross margin business because it doesn't cost you much at all to produce the product. So we're supporting here all that drug delivery. In some place like Great Britain, they have an agency called NICE, which is a poor acronym really for what they really do, which is National Institute for Clinical Excellence. What they do is they say, we're going to approve this drug, but we're only going to allow payment of X. You probably know how this works intimately. And so you just don't make the money on the drug in the UK, because they have NICE and they have something a quality adjusted life year measure that says this drug really isn't, to your point, it just doesn't have enough benefit relative to the cost to society, because in their case, NIH, it's the UK health system, NHS. And so what do you think? I guess that would be game over. I don't know what happens. We can't continue to pay 5 to 10x what Europe pays for a lot of drugs.
I'll let Basil answer that.
Yeah,
Well, I would say what's coming is sort of integrating blockchain to now create systems that pressure drug companies to assess outcomes in what their reimbursements will be. So for example, let's say you're treating some cancer and the outcome can be extending life 6 months, extending it 2 years, 5 years, and each one has a set reimbursement. And if there's no positive response, then the company, gets some minimal reimbursement of their costs. And by doing that, it incentivizes the whole chain, bottom up, start focusing on things that are not incremental, but actually do hit the endpoints society and governments need in order to make it such that the economics work rationally. And when those systems are, sooner they come, the sooner it's better in my case, in my belief, the sooner we could start really rationalizing healthcare spend and making it accessible and a proper portion of our expenditures as the flow.
Before I ask questions, I got a million. These guys are probably more interesting to me. Does anybody have a question? If you don't, I'd like to ask, and I want to make sure we get off moving. But each of you, a couple of things in case of you, David, a couple of companies excited about, a couple of examples, and maybe the same for you, and maybe just give people a sense also when it's you, what a David, of your initiative to, I know you're working with the Technical Institute of Munich to create CBD and THC at perfect levels, vibrio nitrogen. David, first, stuff your.
Yeah, I think over the last year and a half, given the bear market, there's been really maybe forgetfulness around a lot of these truly novel therapeutics. Some of the most exciting technologies like cellular therapy, gene therapies, et cetera, from a public equity standpoint, have been some of the worst performing stocks. So I think we're at a point now where, now that we're almost a couple years into this bear market, the asset values across the board that are trading at distress levels, there's probably 150 plus companies that are trading at negative enterprise values. Our goal is to really go through that cemetery of forgotten biotech stocks, and I think there's going to be a lot of ultimate winners in some of these gene therapy companies, some of these novel cellular therapies as well. Basil referenced gene editing. There's multiple companies that are very quickly advancing through clinical studies and will likely be entering the market in the next couple of years. So I think, really exploring or re-exploring rather a lot of those novel therapeutics is going to pay dividends over the next 2 years.
And so there's $1 trillion of revenue in the sector. That means the market cap is $1 trillion. I mean, I don't know, what's the multiple revenue?
Higher
Than that. So it's talking about a pretty big playground.
Yep.
So maybe.
So our Puerto Rico-based biotech company, it's employing a bacteria to produce chemicals that we view as high-value targets in a bioreactor setting. What that means is that we're taking a bacteria as a production center. So we remove the biomass, which is energy inefficient. We remove weather as a potential risk factor. We remove pesticides and fertilizers. We also are energy independent. And by doing that, we can potentially get up to 1,000-fold improvement in cost material in a cGMP grade, meaning clinical grade that could be consumed by a patient, and higher purity levels that just simply aren't achievable for a plant or a plant cell-based source. And the goal is just to lay this out there's only currently one major plant-based drug produced in a bioreactor, Axol, chemotherapy. The large hangup has been that the efficiency to get scale has been a big challenge. But with our approach, our hope is that the microorganism we've picked has such a high growth rate that it can give you several log units of improvement on manufacturing once you scale up.
Guys, time's up. Thanks.